Welcome, fans, to a special Australian Open edition of Changeover Chat, presented by Sportmaster Sports Surfaces. I'm your host, Randy Master. Today's guest, joining us from beautiful Bristol, Connecticut, is a former professional tennis player, reached a world singles ranking of number 28 in the world, rose to number 3 in the world in doubles. He won the '89 Roland Garros doubles championship with partner Jim Grab. He also won the '84 UVB Tennis Classic in my hometown of Richmond, Virginia, with his brother. I was there. I was about 14 years old. He has served as Davis Cup captain, winning the cup in 2007. He's currently a broadcaster for ESPN, where you can really put this man in any seat, play-by-play analysis, whatever you want to do. He can do it all. He is a graduate of Stanford University. Please welcome Patrick McEnroe.
Randy, very nice to be with you. I'm very impressed with your room right there. I'm a huge Ranger fan and pretty big REM fan too. So I'm not to mention the tennis rackets up there. I like it a lot. I'm impressed.
Well, thank you very much. You're up in Bristol. If not for COVID, you can come down, check it out, have a beer.
That's right. Here. Exactly. I'd love to.
So before we start, I'd be remiss not to recognize the passing of Tony Trebert, one of the icons of the game. I met him a few times up at the Hall of Fame. He couldn't have been nicer to me. What did he mean to you, Patrick, and what did he mean to tennis?
Well, he's a great player, number one. But when I first became familiar with Tony, I was watching him on TV, broadcasting at the U.S. Open with Pat Summerall and John Newcomb. So, great memories of watching the U.S. Open on CBS, listening to Tony. I got to know him a little bit over the years. Obviously, he was the Davis Cup captain when my brother first started playing Davis Cup as a youngster. So got to know Tony a little bit through that. And then, as you said, through his connection with the Hall of Fame, just a class person, through and through. Great player, great captain. Awesome broadcaster, just an all-around great tennis lifer. To be calling matches these days at a lot of the big tournaments, which I've been lucky enough to do, makes me remember Tony and inspired by what he did as a great representative of the sport.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking about great representatives of the sport, they're going to be all over Melbourne the next few weeks. Your ESPN team, I'm used to seeing you and Chris and the whole team up on that big perch, the Rod Laver Stadium in the background. It doesn't look like that right now. What's that like, Patrick, being there? And I'm sure it's surreal, and it's got to be good to be with the whole ESPN family, but it doesn't feel the same, I'm sure.
It's going to be different. There's no doubt. I just arrived here in Bristol, so we're, kind of getting ready this weekend for our coverage, which will begin Super Bowl Sunday evening. I think it's 7 p.m. we come on live. So I've been to the Australian Open, Randy, every year since '91.
Wow.
As a player, obviously, for a few years, and then as a broadcaster. When I first started at ESPN, which is now about 25 years ago, the Australian Open was the only major we had.
Yeah.
Now we've been lucky enough to have, we now have 3 of the 4. For a while we had all 4, but now we don't have the French. So I've been going and covering the Australian Open since probably the late 90s.
Yeah.
So I remember when we had a very small team that would go there. Now up until this last year, obviously we had a huge team, and ESPN put a lot of resources into it. So, I was thinking about this driving up, Randy. We always show these beautiful pictures of Australia. The ocean, the Great Ocean Road, the beautiful sights around Melbourne, the beaches and so on. And we used to say in our production meetings, everyone is 10 degrees back in Connecticut and New York. So people are going to be loving this. So now we'll be with everybody else as far as, I'm looking outside here in the snow, and we'll be covering the tournament. So it'll be different, but we're going to have everything locked and loaded in our studios. And I think it's going to be a great watch for the fans, which is number one, what it's all about, because we did sort of a trial run at the ATP finals from London about 8 weeks ago, myself, Chris McEnroe, and Brad Gilbert. And, considering not being there, it's the next best thing. So it'll be great to have our team back together. But I think most importantly, I think the fan watching at home is going to be in for a treat because we're going to have lots of bells and whistles that we normally maybe wouldn't have because we'll be in the headquarters of ESPN. So we'll see how it goes, but we'll be up all night just like everybody else.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to go, Patrick, back to your days growing up in Douglaston, Long Island. You obviously grew up in a tennis family, and I remember watching a documentary, I think, on your brother, and you talked about your parents and how disciplined they were in instilling discipline in you guys. And were they the ones that got you involved in tennis, or did you just kind of go over to Port Washington Tennis Academy and say, I like this? Or how did that whole love affair begin for you?
Let me correct you on one tiny little tidbit. Douglaston is actually not in Long Island. It's in Queens, believe it or not. But it feels like Long Island is kind of that kind of town. But actually, Douglaston is the next town east from Douglaston is called Little Neck, which is the last town before you get to Long Island. So literally Douglaston was probably about a 5-minute drive to the start of Long Island. So I just wanted to correct you, Randy, on that, because my parents would do the same.
Okay, well, but we can keep it in here. I'm not.
We can keep it in. Absolutely, absolutely. So it's funny because we lived when my dad made a partner at a law firm where he was working. My parents started making a little money, and my parents grew up with nothing. They lived when they first got married in an apartment in Flushing, Queens. My mom was an emergency room nurse. My dad was in law school, actually going to law school at night and working all day. So fast forward to about 10 years later, when my dad made partner at his law firm, where he'd been working for a number of years. So that allowed him to, get a bump up in salary and move into what was kind of the fancier part of Douglaston called Douglas Manor. We'd been living in the other side of Douglaston for a while. And then when you move to Douglas Manor, there's a club there called the Douglaston Club. And it was a summer club. It had 5 tennis courts, a little pool, a little snack bar. And basically that's what we did all summer. So John, when he was about 9 years old, which is pretty old to start tennis, by the way, he went down to the club. And the local pro there was like a college kid, was teaching tennis for the summer. So you could either choose like swimming or sailing, because we lived in the bay. Douglas Manor was up close to the bay. Or tennis. And John was into all sorts of sports, baseball, soccer, basketball. So he's like, well, I don't like swimming, so I'll try tennis. So he started playing tennis, and about a month into the summer, this kid came to my parents and said, like, your son's got ridiculous hand-eye coordination. My parents had never even heard of tennis, and they're like, okay. So he played the rest of the summer. And then towards the end of the summer, this kid came to my parents and said, I think you should take your son to the Port Washington Tennis Academy, which is what you just mentioned. My parents had no idea anything about tennis. I said, okay. They called him up. They said, come for a tryout. So John went for a tryout, and the story goes, Harry Hopman, the legendary coach, had just moved there from Australia, was running the program. So John goes out for his tryout. He'd only been playing tennis for a few months. And Harry Hopman looks at him and says, we'll take him. He's going to be number 1 in the world. Now, I think Harry Hopman said that about every kid who came for a tryout, but in this case, he happened to be correct. So I did whatever my brothers did, Randy. So John, my brother Mark, who's older than me, younger than John, we played all sports. And so I just did whatever they did. So I started playing tennis at the club, the Douglaston Club. I would go down on my tricycle, and I would hit against the wall by myself for hours and hours at a time. And at 6 years old, I played my first tournament, 12 and unders, and won a few rounds in the tournament. So I just, was around tennis, and I loved other sports. I love soccer, especially. I really love baseball. I played a lot of soccer and baseball growing up, but I was always just much better at tennis. Tennis, I had a lot more success. So I gravitated towards that because I won a lot more playing tennis.
Yeah, well, speaking of tennis and the group that you grew up in, and the history that you have in the game, it's been phenomenal to see your rise in the game and how much passion you have for it and how many different hats you've worn over the years. I was thinking about it last night when I was thinking about this interview, that you captain the Davis Cup team. You're the vice captain of Team World for the Labor Cup. Now you have this ATP Cup going on, which I've been watching, and it's great. All the great players are playing it. I don't know what the nickname for the ATP Cup is, but I think you know where I'm going with this. To me, this is kind of an embarrassment. I love all those events, but they're packed all together. And why can't, I mean, this is a joke. And I love all the events, watching them, but don't you think this is a little strange to have all these team events
I
this
think it's
close
a little
together?
strange, but I think in the long run, I mean, you may end up seeing one of them disappear at some point. I mean, Davis Cup obviously has an amazing tradition, but it doesn't bother me that much, Randy, and I'll tell you why. Because it gets an interest of fans. And, obviously participating in the Labor Cup, which I've been lucky to do with my brother and with Bora captaining the other team. And, you've got all the best players in the world, particularly from Europe. So people love it. Fans love it. Okay. So I actually don't mind that there's multiple events, because if you see the ATP Cup in Australia, last year, obviously this year it's a little different with COVID, unbelievably successful. I actually think more team events, the better. Because one of the things I'm learning, I guess, again, for the upteenth time, but now working at our McEnroe Academy with kids, for the last few years since I left the USTA, is that we in tennis lose a lot of kids to other sports simply because in other sports they can play on a team. And tennis is difficult, obviously, to get really good at. That's obvious. But it's also difficult in a way that, once you get into competitive tennis, if you aren't really, really good and super, super motivated, but you're pretty good, and you could play, let's say, a high level of high school tennis or junior tennis, there's not really that many other places to go.
Yeah.
So I think that, I would love to see more team events in junior tennis, for example. So if the professional tours can set the bar and have more team event, you still have individuals playing. It's still one-on-one, but you're playing for a team, for your country. And I think it's just a lot better to keep people interested in the game, and to get kids to stay in the game longer.
Right, right. Well, speaking of American kids, we have one seed from the United States in the Australian Open, and that's number 27 seed Taylor Fritz. As you
Right.
know, this just in, Andy Roddick is the last American to win a slam since 2003.
Yep.
He had a great final with Roger. I think it was 2009 where he almost got that one.
Right.
But is this, Patrick, is this a combination of Nadal, Federer, Djokovic, the three greatest players arguably in our game, just taking over, and America just happens to be one of the countries that can't break through that wall? Or is there an issue? Maybe it's what you were just talking about, how it's not a team sport.
That's
But
part of it. Yeah.
but what the heck is going on here? I mean, it doesn't seem right that we don't have a contender on the
Well, it's
men's
not
side.
right. Yeah, it's not right. I think you hit on a couple of the factors. Obviously, those top three are a big reason. There's not many other players at all that have won majors in the last 20 years, 15 to 20 years. You've got a couple. But I think the bigger issue is the fact that the tennis is not that popular a sport for young boys. Okay, the reason I say boys is because look at the female players we have in the top of the world rankings. Obviously, you've got Serena and Venus and all they've done. But if you look at, what's continuing to go on, Sophia Kenin, Jennifer Brady, Madison Keys, Sloane Stevens, what the Katie McNally coming up. I mean, CC Bellis, right? You can go on, and they keep coming. They keep coming. So obviously, in my years running the USTA player development, we looked at this hard and tried to figure out, what we can do. And I think we put some solid systems in place that would at least help us develop more really good players, which I think we've done. Now, obviously, they haven't gotten to the top, whether it's Taylor Fritz, Tiafoe, Tommy Paul, Riley Opelka, and so on. Sebastian Korda may end up being the best out of all of them. But the truth of the matter, Randy, is that when you look at those female players, comparatively, they're much better athletes than the men that get into tennis in our country.
Right.
Now, why is that? Well, if you have a 6 or 7-year-old child and you're whatever level of socioeconomic you are, whatever race, doesn't really matter. If you're well-to-do, if you're middle class, if you're poor, lower class, it's harder because tennis is somewhat expensive, even in parts of the country where it's cheap, like Florida, like parts of California, and so on. You still have to be able to get to tournaments and play. So the point is a roundabout way of saying we have much better athletes that are young girls that pick up tennis. In boys tennis, it's harder to get them attracted to tennis right away. If you have a kid who's 6 or 7, who's a great athlete, who's a boy, and you're thinking, oh, I want my kid to play a sport where they can maybe become a professional and make a living, tennis wouldn't be at the top of your list because A, it's extremely difficult to get there. It's relatively expensive. A parent has to be heavily involved in the training and the taking to the tournaments. Whereas if you have a kid who's just an unbelievable football player or a basketball player, just let them go play with the team at school or the local community, and they can basically do it. Of course, as they get older, they need more specific training. But in general, you need very specific training in tennis from a young age. So I think we just lose those great athletes. The guys you mentioned, Nadal, Federer, Djokovic, even the other players from other countries that are playing at the top level, they're like ridiculously great athletes. I mean, I'm sorry, Taylor Fritz, he's an excellent tennis player, but he's not a phenomenal athlete. Great tennis player, great tennis skills. So if you grew up in another country, where tennis in Europe is the second or third biggest sport in those countries. So you're getting, I think, a slightly better athlete attracted to tennis at a young age. Whereas in the female side and the girls, the women's side, those kids are being, where else can you make a lot of money as a female athlete? What other sport? As a female, you can't make a lot of money as a basketball player. You can make a lot of money as a tennis player and maybe as a golfer to some extent. Whereas if you're a boy, go down the list, baseball, football, basketball, and so on. So I think that's a part of the reason why because there's the same system we put in place for the girls and the boys at the USTA or locally, local coaches and so on. There's nothing different. It's just they're getting better athletes picking up the game as young girls overall, generally speaking, than young boys.
Okay, so let's talk about the young girls that have risen up through the ranks. They're going to be in Australia, the American women. So the big event starts Sunday night, and I'm talking about the Australian Open. I'm not talking about, there's another big event on Sunday night. We also have Duke.
I remember that. Yeah.
To plug ESPN a bit, we have Duke, Carolina tomorrow night, 6 o'clock.
Not bad.
And that's but this is the main event of the weekend, and for the next 2 weeks. Let's look at the women's side. It's easy to talk about Serena right away. I think she has a shoulder injury. I don't know how serious that is, but Patrick, can she get number 24 here or this year?
Yeah, she definitely can. I mean, she looks like she's in really good shape physically. So she obviously, used the time off, live in quarantine and so on to get herself in great shape. Having her daughter with her, I think has been great for her because she seems more relaxed. Now, is she the favorite? I would say no. I would say Osaka's probably the favorite, but Serena's got to be right in, the top 3 or 4. I mean, Barty's number 1, Hal surface, Kenin, the defending champ. So there's a lot of women that certainly could win it. There's no doubt. Kvitova, Muguruza. So Serena's not the dominant player that she once was. We know that. But is she good enough to win it? Absolutely. So I think the shoulder the thing is just probably precautionary. I watched her beat Danielle Collins. She was serving big. She looks good. So there's no doubt that she can do it. If I were betting on it, I'm not sure I'd bet on her, but I don't bet anyway, but I'm not going to bet against her. I can tell you that.
Right. Well, you talked about Danielle Collins, and she's one of a slew of American women that are coming up the ranks. Obviously, Jen Brady is another one. Any of the American women that some of them are seeded, some of them are on the cusp of being seeded. Coco Gauff is obviously a possibility, but who's going to break through outside of Ken and Serena? And
Well, I don't know if anybody's going to break through to win it. I think, obviously Brady had her big breakout tournament at the U.S. Open, which I think the no fans there maybe helped her a little bit. She's very athletic, has a great, all-around game, great forehand. Kenin, I mean, no one really is still talking about her as a favorite. She's the defending champ. She sort of continues to be under the radar, but she's just a great competitor. Times the ball extremely well. She'll battle to the end. So she's definitely in with a shot. I'd be surprised if she repeated. But then again, I was surprised last year that, she won it. So
right.
Collins, I don't think she can go all the way. Sloane Stevens, to me, still remains to be a mystery. I mean, if she could get it together with her ability, physical ability, I think she should be consistently top 5 in the world. But for whatever reason, she just hasn't been able to get the consistency in her match play. But if you talk about her ball striking, it's up there with anybody else in the world.
Yeah. If you had to quickly pick a winner, who would it be?
I'd probably pick Osaka just because I think if she's on, she's the best player. She's got the most firepower off both wings. She's got great serve. She obviously likes the big occasion with what she did at the Open last year with putting herself out there with the Black Lives Matter and then delivering, on that, playing well when the sort of pressure was on her. And she obviously, played great in Australia before. So to me, she's the favorite. But again, I mean, you could make there could be 15 women that could win.
Yeah. Well, let's go to the men. There aren't 15 men that could win this thing. Are there just 2? Does the beat go on here? Or are we going to see a champion like Team broke through at the U.S. Open? Or is it more of the same?
It's if you're betting, you'd bet on more of the same. Because until you're proven otherwise, Djokovic is not a huge, but a solid favorite down there. He loves the conditions. The court looks like it's playing a little bit quicker, which actually in a way will probably help him because he times the ball so well and he can take the ball early extremely well. The other thing I think he loves about Australia, Randy, is that especially when you get to week 2, it's almost a guarantee that if you're Djokovic or Nadal, you're going to play every match at night. Okay, you might play one match during the day. Why is that better for Djokovic? Well, generally at night, the conditions are more predictable. There's not as, it could be windy in Australia. It could be super hot. It could be actually chilly at night. And anytime the conditions are more predictable, that helps Djokovic, okay? Because he's the best hardcourt player around. So if you take away any elements and you make it almost more like an indoor type of environment, he's just better. If you add some extreme heat, if you add a little bit of wind, Nadal's great at adjusting. He's got this heavy spin. He's an amazing adjuster. So I think that helps him. Now, Team would be the one guy that I think, even if Djokovic and Nadal are playing well, that he can still beat them.
Yeah.
Like he could beat them when they're playing at or close to their best if he's on his game. He's got the physicality. He's got the heavy artillery. He's also learned how to play closer to the line, closer to the baseline, and play with some variety. And obviously winning the Open helps him just, having that win. He still didn't get the win over Djokovic or Nadal, though, or Federer. So we'll see if he can pull it up. But he would be my next guy. Obviously, Medvedev is a threat, Tsitsipas. Those guys are knocking on the door. And we'll see if they can break through.
Okay. Finally, the other game this weekend, I'm sure you're I don't know if there are any other TVs at ESPN, but I'm thinking you may be able
There's
to.
a few. Yeah, there's a few.
You may be able to find it that night, but Mahomes, Tom Brady, all kinds of contrasts and age and what's going to happen there. It's going to be,
It sounds
I'm
like it.
psyched for it.
I'm not a real X's and O's football guy, but I mean, I know the stories of the two QBs, and what Brady's done. He's like Roger Federer, right, or Serena. That he can keep playing at this high level is amazing. Mahomes sort of is winging it out there, but he's got amazing skills and talent. So it sounds like if you look at the teams, it's fairly tight, pretty close matchup. So I'm a longtime Jet fan, Randy. So I mean, I've struggled with Brady because it's like he just destroyed us year after year. So it's hard for me to root for Brady, even though he's an incredible player, and the fact that he pulled this off to go to another team and to get to the Super Bowl is awesome. So I think it sounds like it's gonna be a great game. We'll be watching. We're not planning on doing a huge opening because I think we come on while the game is still going on. So we'll do what we call a soft open and then hope people come over to watch Australian Open coverage after the Super Bowl.
Yeah, well, I'll be looking forward to it. I'm one of these people that stay up all night. I'll watch that 3:30 match at 3:30 here. And again, thanks for coming on. Nobody says no to Changeover Chat 17 times in a row. You didn't do
it. That's right. Great. Well, enjoy. We'll be up all night with you too, Randy, watching the tennis from down under.
All right. Thanks so much for doing it, Pat.
My pleasure. You take care.